Give me a sec, I'll check the audio. Don't want any false.
Giovanni, you're so dancy this morning. Are you sitting on that ball? Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a little better.
Come on, YouTube. Oh yeah, everything's good. We can start.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good wherever you are. We're back again today for the second installment of this week's OpenSIPS Summit 2021 Distributed. Just like yesterday, you can expect to see and hear some great talks on everything SIP. Just want to remind everyone again today that we are still running the fundraiser for the OpenSIPS audit, and that is available on the GoFundMe page. That is, I believe, somewhere in one of the links here in the Slack channels. Again, just want to stress that this is a really important audit. It makes sure that the code is secure for all of us that are using it. It's a great cause to donate to. And if you've got some loose change in your pocket, make sure you drop it in the jar if you can. Today,
Alex, just as a short update on the fundraising, we had some last-minute contributions on this. Vasilius, he, as you said, got some changes into it. Alexei also, and also I guess Jared Bauman. They all contributed in the last minute, so we are getting tight.
We're getting there.
Almost there.
We're almost there. You know what? I'm going to keep.
You know how it is. We need the final push.
That's exactly right. And I'm going to keep pedaling for that change in the pocket for the rest of this week. So today we have actually 4 presentations. We have the first 2 will be for 2 hours, and the last hour will be split into 2 presentations. Kicking off the day today is going to be Alan Quayle. He's going to be giving us an update on the open source telecom survey for 2021 and discuss some of the findings. Alan, are you with us?
I sure am. Thanks
Excellent.
so much, Alex, for inviting me.
Take it away, my friend. Take it away.
Great. Okay, so just give me a second to get the presentation up. Apologies, you're going to see yourself as I share the whole screen, because that seems to be the best way to get the presentation working. So hopefully, can everyone see the presentation? Yes, no?
Hold on a second, I need to switch on the screen. Give me.
Okay, no problem.
Give me a moment.
Yes, we can see the presentation. It's
excellent.
Live and kicking.
Perfect. So what I'd ask is, as I'm running through this material, please ask questions. It'll be very boring to listen to me. I know we've got time at the end as well, so we can ask questions at the end, but I think making it a little bit more interactive for the hour will make it more stimulating.
We'll keep interrupting you.
Exactly, and that's fine. It's fine. You can interrupt. I can cope with that. And first, I'd like to thank the everyone involved in the OpenSIPS Summit for inviting me back. So thank you for that. And also for the broader open source telecom community for all the responses that we had, not just this year, but in the previous 2 years as well. So I'm going to be focusing on 2021, but I do want to give a little bit of background so we know where we've come from in terms of previous surveys. Because as always in life, whenever you do something, it's never perfect. So that back to that phrase, continuous improvement, and that's something that we try with this survey. So we actually have done 3 surveys now. We had one in 2019. That was a broad review of most of the projects, not all. and looked at some of the common deployment issues. All the results are available on the links. We then in 2020 filled some of the gaps that we had around geography, contributions to projects. We did a deeper dive into hosting and redundancy. And yes, we did miss some projects. So we focused in on Dratio, ASTPP, RTP engine, and several others, so that at least for a broad overview, we covered most of the projects. Now, for this year, we structured it slightly differently. So rather than it being one really crazy long survey, we had a sort of a general questionnaire and then project-specific questionnaires. Now, with the broader one, we again looked at security, serverless, telco, training, stir-shaken, IoT, and adoption barriers. And definitely on some of those topics, we got some excellent feedback. So I'll be running through that in this presentation. But as I said, I want to give a little bit of background. So I'm going to do a little recapitulation of 2019 and 2020, because that helps understand why we're doing what we're doing in 2021. So I'm going to go through some of the general survey results, and then I'm going to pick just a few of the projects. I'm not going to go through all of the projects because that would be extremely tedious and take up hours and hours. So again, I'm just going to sort of pick a few that I know people care about. So jumping back to 2019, which, let's face it, really does feel like a different age before the pandemic. So we looked at the open source projects and we asked people which they used. So of course, it was the, as you would imagine, Asterix, FreeSwitch, Kamailio, OpenSIPS, and then, of course, RESTCOM, or as it was previously known, MobiSense, was on the decline. I mean, that's why you see such small numbers. And of course, Telestacks that got bought by Mavenir a couple of weeks ago now, they gave up, I think, last year supporting that open source project. Now, of course, open source projects never die. They basically, slowly fade away, and it's, it's still, there's a repository on GitHub where you can download the code. But of course, without an active community, that software becomes less and less relevant. So that's the reason why you see the low numbers there. But we captured the 4 major projects, and we asked questions around, for example, does the developer community make itself accessible to participation? And from closed, OK, through to open. And you can see here, across Asterix, FreeSwitch, broader base, then, across Kamailio and OpenSIPS do a very good job in making themselves available. Because that's very much, it's hard to please everyone all the time, but definitely when you look at the successful open source projects, one of the bits of feedback that comes back time and time again is the friendliness, the openness, just the ease of being able to work with the project team. We also looked, and this is back in 2019, remember, we also looked at how easy is it to engage on new features, issues. Again, you can see Kamailio, OpenSIPS doing very well. Again, broader base, because with Asterix and FreeSwitch, they have to cover a lot more applications. And then how easy do you find it to hire knowledgeable consultants? Again, you can see quite a big spread. Now, this, as we looked through the responses, we realized, the thing we're missing is geography. Because in some geographies, for example, in Europe, it's easier to hire consultants on these projects than it is, say, in Asia Pacific. So for 2020, we brought in questions around geography so we could understand how different regions, the problems that they're seeing. And a few of the takeaways we had from 2019 was for configuration management scripting, the answer, it's Ansible. Now, one of the questions we raised back then is, should each project share popular scripts to make it just easy for newbies to come in and get stuff up and running? Now, we left it as a question, but I think what we need to do out of these projects is come out with firm recommendations. So one of the changes when I present the total results at TAD Summit EMEA Americas in November is be far more sort of forceful around what we think are firm recommendations for the community rather than just suggestions. So you're definitely, again, year on year, Ansible, that's the dominant project that's used, and a lot of requests to have popular scripts for some of the some of the obvious use cases to make it easy for new people to get these projects up and running. Also, what was interesting when we did this survey is native cloud wasn't that popular. I've already covered geography is an important aspect, and for many of the people from Europe, what surprised them was the size of the Asterisk responses. Well, Asterisk is well established in North America, and it has a broad ecosystem. There's a lot of resellers, system integrators that use Asterisk and hang around that a whole range of different enterprise applications. So again, that was part of the reason, but again, it just highlighted we need to get geography into this survey as well. And also, it highlighted there's still a lot of work that we can do together to promote open source telecom software. So that was our first survey. Then in 2020, we then, as I said, we brought in geography. And as you can see, Europe dominates in terms of where is your company based. Part of that is because of the excellent universities and initiatives focused around open source software. Then next, of course, North America, as you'd imagine, because it really is the center of programmable communications. But also, there are many companies throughout the world that were responding to this survey and are actively using open source software. Then we asked, what are the main challenges you're facing? And then, of course, as I mentioned, in 2019, it was finding knowledgeable consultants. And what we did is we then actually broke it down region by region to say, well, what is the top problem? And this, again, it's from 2020. In India, it was speed of response because of time zones. They ask a question, Europe or America are still asleep, so it can take half a day or more longer before they get a response. Same speed of response for Australia and New Zealand. With Russia, it was language barriers. Central South America was language barriers. Europe, finding knowledgeable consultants. North America, finding knowledgeable consultants. And it's important to say, not just in the open source project, but knowledgeable consultants around VoIP and SIP in general that also understand that project. Because SIP is, it's been around for a long time, but it's not the easiest protocol compared to a lot of web protocols that are out there. And then if you had a distributed team, so you had people in multiple regions, speed of response, and then Middle East was speed of response to questions. So again, that I thought was quite interesting in showing how the different problems broke down. And language barriers is there. It is challenging for most of the projects. It's just, it's one of those problems that's just too expensive to solve, to put a lot of the documentation into multiple languages. Never mind just keeping the documentation current with the latest versions and updates. Then we asked in the 2020 survey, if you face language barriers, what would help? So documentation, of course, in local language. Next after that was knowledgeable native speaker available online to answer questions. Discussion forum in local languages. Now, I know there's always this promise of AI being able to do translation. It's getting better, but it's still, it doesn't compare to when you have humans talking to humans, particularly around the complex topics covered in the open source projects that are reviewed in this survey. We also asked, well, where'd you get your money from? As you can see, there's many different sources in terms of training, development, design, maintenance, general consulting, across a whole range of services, including audit, security, network consulting, installation, customization, hosting, managing VoIP networks, and of course, general telco consulting as well. Because telco is an important piece of many of the projects that get deployed. Then we asked around serverless, because we had, actually it was from TAD Summit 2019. We had several more web-centric companies involved, and they were laughing at the fact that we weren't using serverless in many of the VoIP projects. They referred to as yak shaving in standing up your own infrastructure. So we're like, well, maybe let's understand what the community thinks. So this shows back in 2020, most were no plans, because of all the cons. Again, all the detailed results are published online, back of those links I showed at the start. And evaluating in terms of the pros and cons, and then you see far fewer are implementing, and generally it's used not in the core sort of communications infrastructure. It's more in the analytics or in the testing side. So again, just highlighting what we learned there. Then of course, like in all good surveys, we asked, well, what should we be doing for 2021? So the top one was security by far. So you'll see we got quite a few results there. And what I was really appreciative of from everybody who completed the survey is just how frank, open, and honest. I mean, everything's anonymous, so it can't be traced. So that definitely helped in ensuring that people put down what they think. We repeated the broader survey of trying to review all the different projects that are out there, because feedback we got for the 2020 survey was it was a bit odd. Why are you just asking us questions on like Draccio or ASTPP when there's all these other projects? Well, that's because we were trying to fill in gaps. So we put a structure or a general survey and then lots of project surveys. We asked more telco stuff because that was requested on the role of open source software across IMS, 5G, standalone. And I'll be honest, we didn't get that many responses. I mean, we included the questions, but you'll see, I'm not going to present any results because we only had a few answers. We did ask more detailed project-specific questions. We did track serverless, and you'll see it's interesting between 2020 and 2021 how most people have come to a decision on the role of serverless and their projects. And following what's been requested by people completing, we'll make it an annual survey so that we can track progress of the projects over time. And you'll see, for most of the large established projects, there isn't that much difference. We did see a few of the projects, some changes from 2019 through to 2021, and I'll mention those as we run through. So I just was lazy. I just cut and paste some of the text from the weblog. All I'm highlighting here is we covered security, serverless, stir shaken, barriers and benefits of open source, telcos and open source, training, IoT, and general geographic category information. So that was the general survey, and we asked everybody to complete that, and we had 114 responses. That's the most we've ever had. So again, thank you to everyone who took the time. There were a lot of questions, but most answered, all of them went all the way through. And then we had, of the project survey results, we had 163 responses. So again, thank you so much for the people who went through this long survey and then filled in a couple of project surveys. So again, that was great. So we ended up with 277 total responses. Again, I think this is a great sort of barometer of the health and importance of open source telecom software, where we can see such massive response, because this is a long, detailed survey. Let's not, it's not like a couple of questions, thank you and goodbye. This is really trying to understand some important issues facing the industry. So that's the background. Let's get into the results. So again, similar split in terms of Europe dominates, followed by North America, and the numbers keep increasing for international. So we're seeing more and more people from...
Alan,
yes, go for it.
Alan, I get a question. Why you say that this distribution is thanks to university support?
Yep, because there's it's Fraunhofer focus. They sort of churn out some of the best thinkers, some of the best people that make major contributions to the projects. So and again, when I look at JITC and its history, the European universities really do foster a level of I guess skills, abilities, knowledge that have created many different projects. Now, of course, some of them like JITC get bought up by North American companies, but the project still exists, and you look at its history.
No, that's okay. No, my question is maybe I misunderstood.
Okay,
but
sorry.
You're telling that companies in Europe adopt open source solution because of universities?
No. So I would say the projects. So I get, yes, you're right. It is. I look at it more when I look at the history of the different projects and the people involved in those projects. I see a very close link between projects that come out of universities or projects they did in universities that they spin out and create an open source project. But you're right, actually. In a lot of those universities, they're training people who then go into businesses, into corporations that are skilled, that understand how open source software works. Now, you're going to see a little bit later some of the results around how companies that are skilled, that understand how to use open source, they don't happen overnight. They're built over a number of years. And it can be a barrier for some. I mean, telcos are always a great example on the challenges that they face in using open source, because traditionally they've always used closed source. Now that is changing, albeit slowly. So some, I think we have to look at, because of universities and the projects in there, you're right. It's not just Europe is a sort of center of innovation of open source projects, but it's also creating, people that are skilled and can take that skill in using open source into their relative organizations. So again, all I'm highlighting is that Europe is a center, followed by North America, but a lot of the pull for North America comes because of all the venture investment and it being, the center of programmable communications. Of course, that is one of the major users of open source projects.
Thanks a lot.
No, you're welcome. Thank you for that question. Then, where are most of your customers based? Well, as you'd imagine, you're within, sort of Europe, majority of customer projects are there. However, as you would imagine, with North America, it may not be based there, but it is because of all the venture investment. You've got lots of customers that are based there. And again, a broad distribution. China remains relatively, I mean, it's a billion people, over a billion people, but it's with respect to open source, it's underperforming. Now, part of it is cultural, because they're producing lots and lots of software engineers, but they tend to, I would say, just culturally, build it themselves, then try to ingest open source. They have done. I remember a story from Telestacks where they were sharing the RESCOM. They had a Chinese company had delivered a project to a particular organization. That organization was contacting Telestacks because they had a problem, and they had no clue where this customer was coming from, because it was a Chinese company that was using the project and not buying support or contributing or anything. But anyway, I think that again, this just gives a very interesting split And again, I just highlight that this is growing. It's not that it's underrepresented. It's just I think Central South America, I see strong growth. India, again, what's interesting is we hop back here. It's in terms of responses, it's in number 3 based on region, but less in terms of the number of customers. And that's because for quite a few of the Indian companies working on open source, they're actually delivering into Europe and North America. So again, even though the company might be based in India or Africa, their customers are quite often abroad. And again, with China, that is a language barrier issue, but also I think there's a cultural issue there as well. Then when we ask, well, what's your business category? Most are consultancies. You saw all the range of projects that are undertaken from the 2020 survey. Second are communication service providers, so the UCaaS, CSaaS, CPaaS companies, then communication software providers, then channel resellers. And that's good to see, because this is important, because these are people that stitch together the projects and deliver them into the end customer. Definitely when I was at Astricon, it was great to meet with so many small integrators that serve, like the Greater Atlanta area, or maybe serve like Western Canada and use Asterix, but then add a number of other projects around there. So for example, they were using Asterix not just for PBX, but they were using it for security as well. So, cameras, door locks. So that for them was a very important piece. And that's why we added in for this year some IoT questions. And I'll come to those results in a little bit. We then said, well, what's your business in the business category? How many employees? Now, I was expecting it to be, it's all small projects, but actually it was very interesting to see how many are working in, medium to large customers. So again, this shows the broad base adoption of open source, not just between, small companies that, are trying to do everything on the cheap, but actually you've got some, medium to large customers for which open source is core. Now, this one was really interesting. We were asking, so what open source software do you use? Not just the voice piece, of course, as you imagine, there's a lot here, but we also looked at, well, what web enterprise open source projects are you using? So as you'd imagine, Ansible there, but also Grafana, a whole range of others. Then, the sort of different flavors of Linux, and of course, the different databases in there. Now, this is a hard one. I've bounced this idea around with a number of people. Is there like some dominant architectures? Unfortunately, once you start digging into the details, you then realize just how much sort of personal opinion, in some cases, just what projects you're comfortable with, get used, rather than being for whether it's say a CPaaS. This is the type of architecture across the web enterprise piece, voice piece. I leave it there. If you think there are some dominant architectures and we should include that in a 2022 survey, just let me know, okay? Then how's the pandemic impacted you? Well, generally not. More focus on how cloud hosted than on-premise. What I found interesting was actually, relatively few had more focus on video, in a way, because let's face it, video conferencing was well established before the pandemic. People keep talking about how video conferencing exploded. Well, it did, but it didn't come into existence thanks to the pandemic. It was already a well-established business. It's just it then became the norm for everyone as they had to work from home. But again, generally, impact has not been that significant. Of course, when we look at Zoom's results, when we look at Twilio's results, they've been impacted enormously. In fact, we saw, was it last week? I think it was last week, Zoom gave a outlook that was saying, hey, people are going back to work. We will see that impacting our growth numbers. And then after they announced that, they dropped like 17%. But I sort of look at it as that was always going to happen. It's just, as always with financial markets, they tend to have a knee-jerk reaction. While Zoom's business is still growing, it's not like it's in collapse. Video conferencing is here to stay, just as it was before the pandemic. Now, this one I think is excellent. I was really pleased with all the answers we got across the barriers to using open source. And of course, I say this every year: documentation, documentation, documentation. But that is one of the biggest gripes, keeping it up to date. Support, training, maintenance, and SLAs was highlighted here. Now, as always, as you start to analyze the results, it's highlighted as a barrier, but then when you look at some of the solutions, they aren't rated as highly. Complexity, perception that open source is for geeks. And bear in mind, most of the people who work on these projects are SIP experts. SIP isn't the easiest protocol, especially if you're coming from a web-centric view. But I just point to the work that Dave Horton is doing with Jambons. He's really looking at how we can make open source telecom software as easily accessible to more web-centric developers as possible, because we need to get, the community needs to grow. We see many of these events. It's common, so the usual suspects. I think bringing in more web-centric developers is going to be important to bringing in new blood, but also for it to get applied in many new innovative ways beyond the typical telco related or enterprise communication related applications. As you can see, it runs through misinformation from the closed source and software as a service providers, misunderstanding that open source doesn't mean free. It's very true. A number of people that think it's free. It's like, no, it depends on your application. Also, I thought some were really interesting that, if you've got a complex deployment, using open source can be more expensive than closed source. Open source isn't a universal panacea. It is very broad and can be used in many different areas, but it takes time. Also, I'm trying to see where I can't find where it is now, but the time it takes to evaluate the projects, to build the confidence that this is what you want to run your business on, that takes time, that education. Now, how you overcome: research, education, testing, as always. Long-term objective to build open source competence, because it's not just OpenSIPS. Will this do what we need? There's a whole range of other open source projects you use with OpenSIPS to enable you to solve a whole range of problems. So it's really building that open source competence as an organization is critical.
But maybe there is also some differences, because if you buy some solution, a ready-made solution, and you have a complete solution that is kind of standardized, but it has its own complete documentation, graphical interface, all these kind of things.
That's right.
Usually, when you do an open source project for a customer, you only use the open source as a tool set, and then you must build all the other pieces. So in a way, I believe that they are actually very different markets. Because in a way, when you have a company that is buying an open source solution, normally from some consulting company, it's because they have some specific requirements that are not covered by off-the-shelf
Correct.
So in a way, also, for example, this thing about documentation. No, let me be clear. I mean, usually open source project has very good documentation, actually. I mean, OpenSIPS, Camelio, FreeSwitch, Asterisk 2, they have very, very good documentation. A problem is that you must be at the level to understand that documentation.
Yes.
This from one side. And from the other side, also, that this documentation is not geared toward the end user. It's geared toward integrators or consulting companies. So
I agree.
I mean, no, so it's not possible that a quote normal company adopt open source if it's not a very big company. If not, they just hate to call a consulting company.
I agree. But then we need to, again, it's different segments, because I'll come back to this point again. I know we're starting to run out of time, but let's use Gamma as an example. They've traditionally bought off-the-shelf software, like BroadSoft, and we sold that for unified communication. But they bought Mission Labs this year. And Mission Labs is a company that you can say it's a consultancy, but it's an organization that built the knowledge and the ability to use multiple open source projects to take control of their technology. Because if we look at Zoom, if we look at Twilio, if we look at RingCentral, all these companies, they own their technology. They're not selling somebody else. They own their technology. They own their roadmap. And in some cases, not in all, they're able to adapt that roadmap depending on customer requirements in days, not years, in days. So again, the use of open source enables a company to have far greater control over their product, over their customer experience, over their roadmap, and how quickly they can respond. So, I agree, there's a whole category of system integrators, but I also see a whole range of companies popping up that are building the expertise in how to effectively build product, build services using open source, with the aim of getting ingested into a larger company that realizes it's no longer economic to be reselling, for example, BroadSoft. So I think there's a structural change I'm seeing, and that's why I'm sort of belaboring, this point a little bit in terms of, companies that are built for open source. And of course, those system integrators that you mentioned are doing exactly the same thing in building up that competence so that they can, potentially exit into a larger company that helps that company adapt how they build their products. Because you've got to own your technology to basically be competitive, but also to have enough margin these days. But that was an excellent question. Again, thank you. So, as always, in the real world, it's a lot more sort of fragmented and subtle, but I'm just trying to, at a very high level, capture some of the shifts that I'm seeing. So for time, I'm just going to skip through. We have the benefits, of course, control over your own business, the roadmap, the experience, the understanding, the importance of the community. You've got other people out there who've solved that problem. Customer focus, you control the experience. It isn't a generic experience that meets the requirements of a vast number of use cases. So as a result, is never really optimized for yours. You can build it to your specific needs. Speed, responding to customers in days, not years. Interoperability, again, big benefit. Of course, many of these are in support of innovation. More secure. And the reason why is because you understand how secure it is, because you've had to, build this solution from the ground up. You don't just trust your vendor anymore. I'm going to skip over a couple because I want to go through some of the security results, and I apologize for rambling on a little bit on this. But this was looking at the importance of overcoming barriers. IoT section, this surprised me. Here we had about 59% of respondents answer this section, and 40% are actually using open source telecom software on IoT projects. Most of them are enterprise IoT projects, not consumer, and focused on routers, cameras, door locks, other access control. So it's when you're selling in an enterprise comms product, it's also being extended into supporting a whole range of security. Again, all around this programmable communications capability. Stir shaken just depends on your region. So if North America is important and your customers aren't solving this themselves, then it's an important project. But as you can see, the majority, it's they haven't implemented it yet and don't plan on. Training. Now, again, I apologize. I'll eat into the Q&A time a little bit just to cover some of this. How do you offer it? But I'll skip over to what training do you prefer? So good documentation, manuals, tiers for different skill levels, online training. Now, YouTube videos, again, it's a cultural change I'm seeing. So, for example, with TADHack, millennials tend to refer to a lot of dev documentation as walls of text. So, and I understand. I mean, there is extensive documentation across a lot of the major projects, but for a lot of developers, they look on at sort of vast amount of reading required just to get going. For TADHack, I always say to all the sponsors, it's like a 5-minute video. They just need to understand the essence of what you've got and how to get going. And then after you've got that, the next one is a 20-minute video where basically it shows them how to stand up your resources with all the dumbass gotchas that stop people and get them asking questions. Also, a very interesting project is mooc.org. So this is massive online training. And they have a very interesting business model. I think I talk about it a little bit later, but I'll highlight it here. To do the training, it's free. But to get the certification, you have to pay. Now, one of the challenges for many projects is, training through support, where somebody takes your software, they've not done any of the training videos or any of the training courses. And of course, they're hitting all the usual roadblocks and they're asking you questions all the time. So you're almost like training through support, which is an expensive sink on your time. Well, again, with MOOC, they can evaluate your project for free and see, should we use this? Then once they stand it up, they pay to basically, essentially paying you to get that training certified, so they then get a better tier of support. So it's a great way of getting around some of the challenges in bringing new people in and going through the training as efficiently as possible. And this gives some of the pricing that's out there. As you can see, vast range. Generally for North America, Europe, $1,000 a day. But of course, in some regions, the price points are lower. But again, that's why with MOOC, free to then, if they're using your project, they pay for the certification, and then that gives them a different level of support because they've done the basic training. So you're not having to train them through support. On serverless, the difference, and I just compare the two, is this by 2021, nearly 2/3 were no plans. Some were implementing, but as you can see, the market had decided that, it's not that relevant. And those that had were using it mainly around analytics and testing, not for any of the core of the project. Now on to security. So here you can see the questions at the bottom. Is there an internal security team? As you can see, most don't. Is it involved in RTC security? Well, mostly no. Is it mostly proactive or reactive? So again, all I can say is thank you for the honesty in the answers. I think this was very interesting. Again, we asked around if you're using security testing tools, please list them. Most aren't. Then there was SIPVicious, SIPVicious Pro, SIP Crack Suite, and Test RTC. We had a number of sort of more geeky questions around security. So we're asking around support for RSA or elliptic curve TLS service certificates in SIP. Again, you can see the distribution in answers. What type of defensive mechanisms are you using? Best practices. Now, between firewalls, SBCs, again, it was getting towards the end of the survey, so I think people were just sort of clicking through on some of them, because there were a lot of questions there. But again, you can see, like doing a secure code review, mostly it isn't done, or it's an internal review. But again, it shows there's a lot of work to be done around really embedding those processes. And then just to wrap up in the last 3 minutes, so it gives us 10 minutes for Q&A, we added in this year a class 4 soft switch. So as you can see, that came out top, and it was for several of the projects. So again, we just added in stuff that was missing. Again, we just asked people what categories we should be using. Again, a slight shift around the scale of deployment. So for this year, with OpenSIPS, for more being used at scale. Again, strengths, weaknesses, the future, very similar results to 2019. These were similar results as we went down into how do you architect, configuration management. As I said, Ansible's the answer generally, and own infrastructure. And then the community results were very similar. Similar results, again, with Gamma Elio, we introduced the class 4 soft switch. So as a result, that jumped up. Scale, very similar. Similar in terms of strengths, weaknesses, future, similar results again. So as you'd imagine, with the big projects, there isn't that much that's changing. Similar with pre-switch, again, class 4 telco interconnect, because we added that section in there. A difference, it was interesting. We didn't have, I'm trying to remember, let me just jump back. 21, so we had 21 responses. So it's sizable, but it's interesting. The scale of deployments were quite different. And let's face it, free switch, you need, Gamma Elio or OpenSIPS to be operating at the 100, 1,000, 1 million plus. So, I think all that happened is, people were like, well, the scale we're using it, it's at this point, and a few were, basically assuming, well, in our project we have free switch, we're also using Gamma Elio, but our project is running at 100,000. Similar responses around strengths, weaknesses, and its future. Similar again in terms of the more detailed questions. Similar responses again around the community, and we added in a new project. So, and this was our top project in terms of number of responses. So we had SIP Capture Homer in there. So this shows the community is alive, well, and wanting to answer a whole range of different questions around there. Its strengths, stability, scalability, a lot of use cases, quality of the software, team is quick to help, friendly, native Grafana integration, simplicity in showing data with useful details about calls, native HEP integrations. HEP protocol is flexible, well supported. Again, weaknesses, not enough updated documentation. Users can struggle. Documentation can be hard to understand. Again, it's this on-ramp, I think, is going to become more and more important. You can focus on, the consultants that really understand the project, and that's a community. But that's a community that's getting bought up, and sort of trapped in inverted commas within large organizations. And I think making the documentation easier to a broader web-centric set of developers helps expand the market, helps address different use cases that we wouldn't normally consider. Again, just mentioning the work that Dave Horton is doing, really trying to drive out into that community. But it is hard because you're dealing with people that aren't SIP experts, and especially with the younger generation, are very video centric and tend to look at documentation as a wall that they'd rather not jump over. Again, you can read all the feedback that came. Future promising, a lot of hope around where the project goes. And also, it's really a data analysis engine. So, it doesn't have to be limited to SIP. And that's where, of course, it's doing a lot of good work, but people see how it can expand into a number of different areas. And then, what's the client protocol? And that just sort of shows the responses we got there across all the different HEP clients. Then this is just as you can see, it's very similar, Ansible, of course, in the configuration scripting. And then, it's some of the questions weren't directly relevant, but, like on the redundancy. But still, I think you can see here, it's a great community. You can see it's, lively, open, and easy to engage with. So again, great responses for Homer. I'm going to skip over Jambo and Straccio, but I say keep an eye on this one because I think they're doing some good work in engaging an even broader set of developers out there. And that will, of course, feed into all the other open source telecom projects. But similar results to we got for 2020 across the community. So just to wrap up, in training, we've got an interesting dichotomy where people don't expect to pay for training when they're investigating projects, but they will pay if that project is now part of their business. So that's why I think, and this came again from the survey. People were saying, look at moc.org. Its pricing is interesting because it's free to learn, but then if you want to get your training certified, there's a fee. But that's great because then you can offer support to certified developers because you don't then provide free training through support. While the mature projects didn't change that much, I didn't include these results here, but when I present the full and those who completed the surveys, you've already got the full results. Whereas those results did change a little because it's sort of focusing down, and also the community's maturing. So there are some changes. It's not set in stone here. Also, open source telecom software is part of a suite of open source projects. So again, it's a question around should we investigate dominant architectures. I'm not sure we'll get a clear answer, but I'm interested to know people's views. And this, I think, is very important. Companies that use open source make a long-term commitment to building an organization that understands open source, that's committed to owning the product, its roadmap, and the customer experience, because that's essential to being competitive. And companies who are successful with open source don't happen overnight. It takes years, and you need people in there that have that sort of depth of understanding. And that's why I think we'll see more acquisitions like Gamma buying Mission Labs. I think that will happen more and more as larger companies realize the importance of open source to their future, which of course is great news for OpenSIPS and its future. And again, I know documentation, but really, Twilio has great documentation, also great API design, and it's built for a broad base of community of developers. Now, I'm not saying that's where OpenSIPS should be going, but I think as an industry, we need to bring in more and more fresh blood, not just the hardcore SIP geeks. I think finding it's not trying to copy Twilio, but a step towards. And I think that's why I just sort of highlight the work Dave Horton's doing as being something that's worth watching and seeing if he can make that successful. And then just to wrap up, and apologize for using up almost the hour, we've got TAD Hack coming up on the 25th and 26th of September. So this is Global Hackathon focused on programmable communications. Please get your communities involved. Please get involved. Mash up your projects or services with the global sponsors. It's fun. It's all about showing the broader sort of dev community just how powerful all your projects are. And the great thing with this year with TAD Hack Global is the winners will be presenting at Enterprise Connect. So the weekend before Enterprise Connect, we tag we're EC21, and then we'll have a slot at Enterprise Connect. That's the largest enterprise communications event in the world, taking place in Orlando, and we'll be presenting some of the winners at that event. So again, to a very important community for a lot of the open source projects. It's a great way of getting some attention. So anyway, that wraps up. I apologize for using up all the time. I didn't mean to, but maybe we've got time for one or two questions.
Can I ask?
Absolutely, go.
Go. So I was wondering really about your discussion about the open source project need to do a little bit more about the router deployment and everything like that.
Yes.
And I was wondering, where do you see the line between deployment is having a lot of specific customization per company?
Yes.
And this is like, also for me, it's like a big question because we have everything in assembly and everything. And I wish to contribute this kind of code, but the question is where it's becoming not generic enough to contribute.
Yes. And I have no good answer. I think that is something that we should address in next year's survey to get some to help define the criteria, because it's going to depend. I would say, as always, let your community lead. So the community will have some sort of common cases where you're seeing this coming up a number of times, where maybe having some scripts or having additional documentation or helps that particular use case. So I'd say at the moment that sort of extending out is very case by case, but in defining the criteria, I think that will help many projects in being more successful in expanding the scope and relevancy. And we should think around the questions we need to ask to get that feedback in understanding the criteria.
Thank you. Thank you.
No problem. We're up on time. I apologize.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Alan, thank you so much for everything that you do. This was amazing information for all of us.
Thank you so
Let's
much.
give Alan a round of applause, everyone.
Thank you very much.
And if you have any further questions for Alan, you can use the Slack Summit chat. He'll be in there. Be happy to answer any questions for you.
Absolutely.
And before we get to our next speaker, I wanted to take a moment to recognize our sponsor again, Subspace. They've been very generous in helping support the summit this year. And Bogdan, if you don't mind, just giving us a little bit again on Subspace.
Sure. First, trying to, let's say, connect a bit with Alan's presentation. It's everything. This kind of sponsoring. It's basically part of the big circle between the open source projects and, let's say, the industry entities. So basically sponsoring, funding different kind of activities related to the projects. But it's a way of giving back to the community. And I really appreciate that the guys from the Subspace, they pay attention and they are aware basically of this. And of course, for doing this in particular with the OpenSIPS project, and you know, helping growing this kind of relation between the two sides of the world, the developers and, you know, the service providers. We will have tomorrow William King from Subspace talking a bit about how this idea about providing, you know, a very fast and reliable network between different points in the internet, especially solving, I wouldn't say problems, I would say challenges raised by, you know, all this pandemic and everybody's need to remotely talk to, remotely work, remotely have conferences and everything. So probably in these days, most of the things, of course, outside families, are remotely. So yeah, we need
even families.
Okay, let's not get into that. It's a bit out of scope, but but yeah, and especially for let's say for our field of work with the SIP, RTP, and RTC, and all these, you know, everything it's very sensitive and relies on good networks. So even if it's a not direct connection, you see the, you know, the way this what Subspace does connects to the world, let's say, we are working for. So again, thanks for Subspace, and we are looking forward for tomorrow's presentation of William to give us all the full details on what they are doing.
Awesome, thank you. Again, just want to make sure that everybody reaches into their pocket and checks for their extra change. We do have the fundraiser still going. We've almost reached our goals, but we're not quite there yet. And we're looking for you guys this week to get out your pocketbooks and help us out a little bit. Let's close this thing up. Let's get a nice security audit done for the OpenSIPS platform and all the code.
And we will have today as a speaker, if I'm not wrong.
You are.
He will conclude this day. We have Sandro Gauci from the audit team. Basically, he will share all the information about you know, what's the idea and how this audit will happen. And again, keep in mind that the whole audit project, it's an open project, meaning that we would love to get as many people as possible involved into this project, because the end result again will be public for everyone. So everybody using for whatever purposes OpenSIPS will benefit of this endeavor, of this audit, because at the end of the time we're gonna have a more safer project. So feel free and
feel like you need to.
Well, yeah. Let's say we define differently our needs, so I didn't want to go into that direction, but
that's well, okay. I'm shameless. I need them to reach into their pockets. Okay, so we're running just about 5 minutes behind schedule. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Liviu Chircu. He's going to be talking about first steps with Kubernetes and OpenSIPS. Liviu is also one of the core developers here on the OpenSIPS project. So everybody, turn up your speakers. I think we got a good one here.
All right. Thank you, Alex, for the introduction, and welcome everyone to this presentation. It's as always it's like a pattern, right? Let me present. Sorry, that I'm constantly after Alan, but hopefully I'll manage to keep it interesting.
It's genetic.
Yeah, I guess it's not going to be that high level as his presentation, but still we're going to talk about a lot of Kubernetes problems and learn together. Also worth to mention that if you're a beginner with Kubernetes, this is the perfect presentation for you because I'm going to cover even some basic concepts. For example, we're going to discuss some abstractions in Kubernetes, what the cluster topology looks like, how you can build one, before getting into exactly how OpenSIPS integrates with it. Of course, there's going to be some of that, and there we will talk about problems and how to approach them. As well as some tools to make your life easier, how to debug things in Kubernetes, because you'll see things are, it's a complete paradigm shift, and how we can keep learning. As Alex already introduced me, my name is Liviu Chircu, right? It's not Chircu. I'm an OpenSIPS developer for, I guess, a bit over 9 years now, and my time is kind of split between the open source side of things and the consultancy side of things, along with OpenSIPS solutions. And speaking about projects, this whole Kubernetes endeavor is part of a project. And to give you a little bit of background, it is not yet in production. So my perspective of things is still from a, let's say, learning point of view, right? Where I'm just figuring things out along with you guys as well. So give a basic question on Kubernetes is why should I choose it, right? Should I look into alternatives, into orchestrating my containers? And while there are a few ones out here, I've extracted some Google search trends on projects such as Apache Mesos or Docker Swarm, or even plain old hosted EC2 instances, right? Why not? They're not even comparable. So it's almost like the whole bandwagon, right? Everybody jumped the Kubernetes bandwagon, and this is how things are in 2021. I guess this is the dip in 2020 when everyone started working from home, right? You can see the productivity jump here. There were a lot more searches. And as I promised you, right, even if you're a beginner with this stuff, let me do just one slide on, rather a couple, on what containers are, right? Because the idea of Kubernetes is that it manages containers. So you start from this Docker file. This is a very generic format. It runs on all operating systems, Windows, Linux, Mac, and whatnot. And it builds images. And these images are, you cannot change them anymore, right? They are, let's say, read-only. This is why you can also search for the term immutable infrastructure. It's almost a paradigm shift where you no longer have these instances that you micromanage, right? You log into them, you do changes live and whatnot. Rather, you manage them as in swaths, right? You have, all of a sudden, you're managing tens of such containers or hundreds of thousands. And that's what, I forgot to mention, right? The image is then deployed to become a running container. So this is the runnable side of things, while the image is rather static. And of course, I'm not going to get into Docker Hub and registries and all of that. Yeah. Okay, so I thought about making things a bit dynamic and interactive and keeping things fun. So I'm going to try to do a poll on the Summit chat. And let me see if I can move fast with this one. In the meantime, you can read the question. It basically tests our knowledge of containers and what their limitations are, right? Like, you know, you can do a lot of things with them, but to what degree? And the question is simple. If I have a CentOS 7 based machine, will I be able to host a Debian 10 container? And I think I've got all the things ready, and I put it on the Summit chat. So does everyone see the survey? Can you vote on it? And feel free to start answering if it works. I'm not sure if you see it, or let me. Okay, so the votes are coming in. Maybe I should stop sharing a bit and switch to the other one. I hope I don't ruin Max's setup. Let me share the window. Okay, so you should. I'll just take like maybe half a minute, maybe maximum of 1 minute here, and the responses are anonymous. So don't worry that you might submit the wrong answer. Right? It's completely fine. We are here to learn. Right? That is the whole point of this. So can we host that container? Does Docker work like a virtual machine, or is there some limitations with it, and what are the limitations? Okay, so by this point, I'm guessing the YouTube is live, right? And people are getting sent to the Slack. So we've got like 20 answers, and yeah, it is indeed. It's a tricky question, right? It's that's why I chose it, because it's quite enlightening once you get it. So I guess it's enough. I'm looking that we are 40 or rather 50 persons live, and it's like half of the audience. So thank you for the answers. I will stop presenting and go back to the slide. So 1 in 5 people answered that it will not work due to incompatible kernels, right? And you were onto something there, but in fact, it will work. In Romania, we have this word of this describing this fictitious animal named an ostrich camel, right? Which is neither an ostrich nor a camel. Because so while it will work, once you log into the container, you will notice that it's running with a CentOS kernel, but the OS feels like a Debian 10. So, it's kind of the fun things you can do with containers. I can have just a base kernel, and then I can host all kinds of Linux distributions onto it, simply because it reuses the kernel. There is no guest operating system like we've been used to having in the hypervisor paradigm, right? With the virtual machines. So when I understood this, to me, it was like an aha moment when I realized you can do that. So that's all on containers. I'll move forward. On Kubernetes, it allows us to orchestrate, right? To host a large number of such containers, to the point where I guess it's useful to start looking into it when you have more than when you have containers in the order of tens, right, where they become difficult to manage. As a project, it is huge. Started in 2014. There's a lot of activity, a lot of contributors, and it's almost has 4 million lines of Golang code. And also interesting to know that things seem to be dwindling down. So maybe it's becoming feature complete. Who knows? They have a really active release policy. They ship a new release every 4 months. And if you look at the deprecation policy, if you pick a version, it will get deprecated within a little over 1 year. So it puts a bit of burden on the cluster maintainers as well, which leads me to a final question here, or rather idea. Which one should you go for, right? If you're planning on getting into Kubernetes, should you take up the burden of hosting it, or rather, should you use a Kubernetes as a service, or KaaS, which is a new acronym in the AS family of cloud buzzwords. And with a self-hosted one, while it sounds good on paper, there may be some hidden costs over there, right? You will have to manage a lot of the network configuration, separate control plane from services, maybe some network policies, and so on and so forth. You might find yourself doing more work on the cluster itself than on the containers you're planning on running into the cluster. So that's why you could also opt for a paid service, right? And every cloud provider nowadays just has a Kubernetes, from, of course, the major ones, Google, Amazon, Azure, Red Hat, right? IBM, DigitalOcean, but also even Vultr is running a beta service, and so on and so forth. The market is fully growing. And that's about it on the high level. Let's get a bit deeper into some Kubernetes abstractions so we can use them on solving our OpenSIPS problems. So make sure we are all on the same page. First of all, even if you go for hosted or self-managed Kubernetes, you will have to work with a cluster at the end of the day. And these are some interesting numbers from the site as to how big these clusters can get. It can have up to 5,000 machines and host 300,000 containers. So it's kind of mind-boggling to see how big they've made it and how optimized. And for example, if I remember correctly, there is a define, like a hard-coded define in the OpenSIPS code that limits you to 64 OpenSIPS cluster nodes. I'm not sure. I hope I'm not talking crap here, but kind of shows the scale of the project. Some abstractions that we'll be using. There's container. We've talked about them, and then there's pod, right? The host for the container, and then multiple pods can be grouped into replica set, stateful set, deployment, and daemon set. I'm going to go through each of them one by one and see which of them apply to OpenSIPS, to an OpenSIPS deployment. And this is the part that executes, right? Let's say that they call it a workload, but also you have to expose these sets, and you do it through a service or an ingress, and we'll take at them each one by one. So the best way to understand a pod is that a pod is to Kubernetes what a virtual machine is to a bare metal box. Right? It's like we're used to hosting virtual machines. Similarly, we host pods in Kubernetes. And then going a bit deeper into the abstraction layer, a container is to a pod what a process is to a virtual machine. So that means we can have, I guess it's, you can ask, what if the process forks multiple child processes? Okay, that is still within the same container. So, but you get the idea. We can have multiple containers into a pod. That is pretty much the basic idea. And here are some more interesting info on pods. Just like virtual machines, they have their own IP address, which is shared, right, by all containers, similar to how all the processes would share an IP, the local IP on a virtual machine. And these pods can be scheduled on virtually any worker node of the cluster. There is no rule to how Kubernetes creates them. You just kind of give it an idea for how many it should create, and then it will not only schedule them on random nodes, but also it can reschedule them. It can kill, maybe it detects that some worker node is too busy, it will kill off a pod and reschedule it on some other node. And so this, given that there are sufficient scenarios in OpenSIPS where you'd kind of want your server to be static, right, and not have its IP address move all over the place, and with implications on all kind of levels, you have to really, think things through before shifting to Kubernetes. And make sure you will not get bitten by this new way of thinking of, how should I put it? Like it almost like feels like herding sheep, right? You don't care about each individual sheep. You just know you have 500 of them, or yeah. And then let's group them. So multiple pods group into a replica set. We're actually not going to be using replica sets directly. Rather, there is an even higher level abstraction, which is the deployment. But just for the sake of an example, we can take a look at how a YAML for a replica set looks like. You start with the API version. At some point, some resources may have some beta version attached to them. And then you say what you are trying to build, right? Because all of these are resources you create in the Kubernetes cluster. And then you label it. And in the spec, this is the interesting part. We define how many pods it should create and what is the content of these pods. This is the pod spec. It may be a bit confusing. You may ask, okay, I had a spec before. Yes, but this is the replica set spec, and this is the pod spec. And the pod has a list of containers, and this one, the example is taken straight from the Kubernetes website. They create a PHP server and a Redis database. As I was saying, we will be, for the purpose of OpenSIPS deployments, we will definitely be working with a deployment rather than a replica set directly. And one obvious question is, what does a deployment offer on top of a replica set? Rather, I think it makes your life easier with regards to rollouts and also scaling up or down the deployment. Also, there's again, rather than me starting to describe right the Kubernetes docs, I just felt a lot safer to just put them here so we can discuss them. And it's the rollback is also a feature that we would not have had we gone with the basic replica set. The YAML, interestingly enough, looks pretty similar if we put them side by side. When we create a deployment resource versus a replica set resource, we're doing the same thing. We're tagging them, and we're defining a spec that has 3 replicas on both sides, and a pod spec, and then a list of containers. So for the sake of the definition, they are, I'd say, 90% identical. But then you will see, there will be a section where I teach you how to walk through the documentation. You will see that there are certain micro options, right, on each of these levels, maybe in the deployment spec, that you will not find in the replica spec, and vice versa. So yeah, I guess it's a new world with YAML programming, how I like to call it. Some tips for deployments is that we already discussed about the completely unstable scheduling of pods, right? You can have them fly off on any Kubernetes worker node. And the same thing happens with the IP addresses. They will, each time a pod is created, they will have a different IP address, but also a different host, which looks like this, right? Where they have this hash string attached to it. And again, this one changes each time you recreate the pod, which also leads to an unstable DNS identifier. So that also will change. You cannot have any stability in there. And not only that, but the ordering is also unstable. So let's say I created 3 pods, right? You would expect the 4th one to come on the right end of them. No, Kubernetes can order them as per its liking. And sometimes that might be a problem, especially when we'll get to it in a few seconds, especially when we have a more stateful OpenSIPS application. We would want more predictability, let's say. And that is what stateful sets offer. So stateful set is similar to a deployment, but it has a better, as they put it here, a sticky identity for each pod. Also, straight from the docs, they assure us that stateful sets offer unique network identifiers. At first, I thought, okay, cool, I will have the same IP address on each pod, right? But it's not the case. As you will see, the only thing that is stable, I'll skip a couple of slides just to show you, is the host name. So you get, if I want to host 2 SBCs, they will always have the same host, right? SBC0 and SBC1, which is pretty nice indeed, because I will get a stable DNS for it. But still, the IP address will change each time. And also a great thing about stateful sets, and it could also be useful in production, where you don't want that much chaos when you have to deploy a change in your, let's say, deployment of servers, is the way you can do updates, where it will ensure kind of an ordering. So more concretely, if we roll out an update, it starts with one server with one pod. It kills it, restarts it with a new software. Until that one starts successfully, it will not go further down and risk ruining the entire deployment. So it will take them one by one. So that is awesome to have. And a lot of the times, looking at the YAML, it starts getting pretty big, though not that bad, because you have to have this state, what do they call it, a headless service on top of it. We'll talk about services in rather soon. So you expose it, but rather you don't give it an IP address to be reached at. This is just so it manages the identities of the pods, as far as I could read. And similar to the other ones, this is a stateful set kind. It also has a specification, and obviously it also has replicas, but because it is quite similar to a deployment and a replica set. And in the spec, you have these options. I guess, I can't be sure, but I guess most of them have this termination grace period seconds, very useful option. As well as the list of containers. Also, there is the option to attach a volume to the stateful set. Right, and as for the pods, the scheduling is still unstable. You cannot tell which worker they'll end up on, and same for the IP addresses. But at least you get stable host name and DNS and ordering. Right, SBC2 follows after 1. It's not total chaos in there. Daemon set is the last abstraction I guess we'll talk about, and we'll be done with Kubernetes. with a theory at least. I'm not sure it will be useful, at least to us for the moment, but it seems to be a way of making sure some kind of daemon runs on each of your Kubernetes node, right? So there is a pod that runs there. So that's what a daemon set ensures. They say you could use it for logs or monitoring. Could be a cool thing to have. Definitely, I don't think it's applicable to deploying OpenSIPS with a daemon set, but I could be wrong. So let me know. Okay, so now we move to some scenarios and think through some OpenSIPS applications and how we could, or rather what abstractions from Kubernetes would better cater to them. And let's start simple. And in Kubernetes, it's ideal if you can simplify your application as much as possible. And by simple, I mean stateless, right? And what is the difference between stateless and stateful? In a nutshell, just imagine it restarts, right? What if your application restarts? Will it still be able to kind of deliver a similar output, or has it lost its internal state and needs to be, or rather the whole scenario needs to be restarted? So here, one example of a stateless OpenSIPS service, you don't even need to be transaction stateful, let alone dialog stateful, is maybe you have an LCR server that simply replies with 302 and it gives you the cheapest routes, right? That would be a perfect application for Kubernetes. Or maybe a residential SIP service, if we use the recently introduced NoSQL database clustering, where all of the data lives in the database, and OpenSIPS does no caching. There are no dialogues because we just use record routing for the SIP packets. So the mid-dialog requests will route just fine. There are no clustering sinks, and it is quite stateless. One of the first things we ask is, do I need high availability? Or I guess, of course, we all need that. Rather, do I have it in this scenario? And here, this is great news, because it's the fact that we designed the app to be stateless already solves this problem. So all we have to do now is just make it reachable, right? Solve the reachability problem. How do we connect all of these pods that we schedule for creation? How do we connect them to the outside clients? This is a diagram taken also from the Kubernetes, where they recommend that we put a service abstraction in front of the pods that is also forwarded to by an ingress. But as we read a bit more about ingress and the Kubernetes concepts, we find out that ingress was only designed for HTTP and HTTPS. Moreover, they explicitly say that if you expose services other than HTTP and HTTPS, typically you should use a node port and a load balancer, or a load balancer service. Okay, so let's see what are all the possible service types. So there are 4 of them. So they just said that cluster IP and external name shouldn't be used here, and node port feels a bit too static, right? The service would have just an IP. So kind of the best option here seems to be a load balancer. And then we start, right, churning through the docs. Okay, what kind of load balancers do I need? Does my cloud provider have such a service? And then we run into the second Slack live poll of the day, which is, do we know what kind of load balancer flavors are there available in nowadays public clouds? So feel free to browse through the question as I start the poll. Let me see if I get the question here. Okay, this will be a simple yes or no answer, because also I found it really, okay. I've used, okay, so I cannot run a poll anymore because I've used 25 responses. That is sad. So we'll skip that. So the answer is that these words attached to each load balancer flavor actually refer to the OSI stack, and whereas the application load balancer works on the 7th layer, right? So it decapsulates the packets and is able to extract information such as URL paths or even SIP HTTP headers, right? Because Kubernetes is designed to work in HTTP, while the more rather, let's say the faster load balancers work on a lower level of the stack. They don't even, there is no need to decapsulate the packets further. By the way, if you haven't figured it out, I've represented the packets as an onion, right? That I don't know, it's my personal favorite metaphor here on the networking. The further up you go into the stack, the more you have to decapsulate that onion, right? And vice versa, when you try to transmit a packet, you have to re-encapsulate it, and only when you get to the physical layer can you send it out. So that is why the network load balancers are advertised as being super fast and so on and so forth, because they just decapsulate it a bit, and then they can just route it out to whatever policy they are built to follow. The gateway load balancer works at level 3, and I guess probably classic load balancers work there as well. And the thing with them is that they are completely stateless. And as you can see in this slide, they are so OpenSIPS actually will not work too well with a classic load balancer, because just think of an invite transaction, right? It is a 3-step process, and we have to send 2 requests. So what if the ACK, right? So we ship the invite to one server, and then the ACK goes to another. So that one won't work. However, the network and gateway load balancers, I'm going to show a bit later, have more state into them, and the scenario should work. What about Kubernetes? Does it have support for this? Of course. It is in the service spec. There is this option, load balancer IP. And of course, they even warn you it will be ignored if the cloud provider does not have this load balancer. So you might want to think ahead and ask yourself, why am I going with this cloud provider? Does it meet all of my needs for the application, and so on and so forth? It's maybe better to do ahead of time rather than once you've chosen them. And as far as network load balancer support, most of the major cloud providers have layer 4 network load balancer support. Here is AWS, which seem to have it, by the way, for UDP, right? Because, of course, HTTP has been there since forever, and they've had load balancing for TCP. But the problem here is that we want to do SIP over UDP. So they've had it since 2019. Google have it as well, network load balancer. And Azure, as always, they have a high-performance, ultra-low latency layer 4 load balancer, right? So you don't want to screw with Azure. Here is how YAML would look like for our stateless service. Here is the deployment, right? The way we create our set of pods. And I've defined the 3 replicas, and we tag it. And then there's a specification for the pod. We have 1 container in the list, right? And the image is pulled from our Docker registry that is being accessed using with these credentials. This is you could write this down if you didn't get it, and you can look it up afterwards. And it exposes the UDP SIP port. Perfect. So that is the deployment, and now we have to build the service in front of it. And this only takes a few lines. It's a service kind, right? That exposes the 5060 UDP port, and these are the load balancer IP, the IP we create in the cloud provider, and the load balancer type. We have to explicitly set it to load balancer. So that's as far as sorry, how we would go about deploying a stateless app. But what if we make things more complicated? What if we want dialog support? Maybe even do topology hiding, right? Or maybe a mid registrar that has a lot of state into it. What options do we have here for high availability? Can we get away with deploying this to Kubernetes? And one of the first problems you will realize when switching this paradigm is that it is a bit more difficult to deploy virtual IP software, such as VRRP or KeepAliveD. It is difficult to synchronize across pods, and I mean, it is virtually impossible, right? There is no state between them. How should I say that? The basic unit of deployment is the pod. It is not a pair of pods. So this leads me to the question, rather, we need to think whether we can do a hot backup scheme at all. Because we cannot pair up any pods. They are meant to be individually deployed and destroyed, and they're meant to be as decoupled and simplified, even in this simplistic philosophy. So here I've maybe simulated, even if we were able to. So this, no, yeah, I guess. This is how it would look like if we were able to pair up pods, right? We would have a pod with maybe an SBC and a VRRP.
But this is just impossible.
Yeah. It's impossible. It's maybe not even worth talking about it. Yeah. Next, maybe we can have this topology where we have one pod and I have two SBCs into it, right? And one of them replicates to the other one. We have the traffic coming through to the first one. Remember that the IP is at the pod level. It is not at the container level. So we need to multiplex them maybe based on port. So this one listens on a different port. Okay, so good, we can do this. But the question is, how does it take over the SIP traffic, right? The traffic, even if the first SBC dies, the traffic will simply go to 5060. It will never, we cannot reroute it to 5070. So pretty much you cannot do a hot backup. So at least for now. But can we do at least something about it? Sure, we can. What if we deploy this pod where we have the SBC and it just backs up to a database container, right there? It's a pod with two containers. And should we ever have a crash, or I guess this accounts for most of production failures, right? Servers just, I mean, I guess they can sometimes, at large scale, you can have maybe kernel panics and whatnot, but typically 90% of failovers are due to crashes. And in our case, if the SBC crashes, Kubernetes will just restart it, and it will pull all of the data from the Postgres DB and resume all of its calls. So this is more than fine for what we need. So high availability comes with a bit of compromise. We can still do it, but we cannot have this full the hot backup we used to have in our virtual machine paradigm. So how do we link this with the outside? Again, the same problem. We have to have this service in front of it. And with the load balancing would work similarly. And here I'm getting to the slide I was mentioning earlier. This should work in a similar way because the network load balancers take a look at both the source IP, all of the source IP, source port, destination IP, and port. So the UDP traffic I've highlighted here with the bold, it will always go to the same OpenSIPS pod. So this should work. I haven't gotten yet to test this because we're using a self-hosted cluster, so that does not have a cloud load balancer possibility. But I believe this is fairly doable, especially with the documentation I've been reading. And it should work for TCP as well. A question that at least I had, and I'm not sure I can answer it right now, is that I saw the sequence number being included. So I'm a bit puzzled as to whether this would still maintain the stickiness, right, to a single pod. Maybe it's just a false problem and it should work as well. So if the YAML for all of this, a bit more complicated, because if you remember, we have used a stateful set here, because I would much more prefer to have a more predictable deployment and rollout procedure here. And of course, a lot of this is still new to me, so that's why these hacks with starting up the MySQL container, right? Probably in the final version, the solution would look a bit different, but this is a quick way of just starting up a MySQL container. And in front of it, of course, the similar service, just the load balancer type and the load balancer IP. And of course, this is the headless service required by the stateful set. This is kind of they go hand in hand. If you want a stateful set, you have to do this copy paste as well. So this is as far as the stateful application goes and what kind of problems you can run into there. Let me go through a bit of tips on both scenarios. So of course, whether you're stateless or stateful, you may sometimes have to obtain the public IP of your pod. And I tried to come up with the quickest possible way of doing it because I didn't want to make my container image too big, right? By installing curl or vget or parse JSONs with JQ and so on. So this is a nice way of just doing it with netcat, which is a super small package. And you just build a quick HTTP, a small HTTP request and send it to this service. Maybe in production, right? It would be wiser to rely on a couple more services. So for example, what if config.me is down, right? Maybe use a couple more. So it can be complicated and made more robust for sure. As far as scaling goes, this is a command to scale up our stateful sets. We just increase the number of replicas. You can do it right from the command line. Alternatively, if I go back to the YAML, you could write a for in here and then reapply the whole YAML. But again, there are many more ways to skin a cat with Kubernetes. And when you scale down, again, you reduce the integer here. You patch it, right? First, we use the scale command and now the patch command, and we turn it down to 2. What about rolling out new builds? This is a really nice feature of Kubernetes that I really enjoyed, to be honest. It is that it allows you to deploy only to a few instances, to deploy change, right? And not risk ruining the entire deployment. So here, for example, our service runs on maybe a couple of servers. but we add a new one just for rolling out this canary build. And then you set the partition. If you think of the SBCs as an array, right, with index 0, index 1, index 2, this partition gives it the start index. So in this example, it will update 2 and above. Of course, there are no servers above, so it will only update 2. Okay. Again, it doesn't update anything, sorry, rather prepares it for update. This command does the update, where we replace the container image with our image taken from our Docker registry. Currently, we are at V12, and as you can see, the SBC2 is running on 12 now, and it crashes. So kudos to us, because we didn't ruin the whole system, right? We didn't affect the majority of users. We can now safely deploy version 13, and that one is successful. And now once 13 is good, we want to deploy, of course, 13 to the rest of the servers. And here we just we rewrite the index to 0, so the whole array gets updated to 13. And of course, now we can even delete SBC2 from the scheme because it has done its job and we no longer need it. What about automation? How do we automate reloads and when a new container or pod pops up, how do maybe we have to integrate it with another set of pods, maybe, right? And there are all kinds of problems you may have. And for this, there are a couple of lifecycle hooks. So here is the container stanza. I'm not even sure what to call them anymore. And you have a hook on post start, which runs, I wouldn't want to get this wrong. Anyway, it runs near the time when your container starts. Not sure if it's before or right after it starts or whatnot. And the one that runs before the container is killed. And you can do whatever hooks you may want there. Also, assuring to know that Kubernetes guarantees delivery, and each hook is intended to be at least once. So it is up to the hook implementation to handle this correctly. So, okay, we may get called twice or more, no problem. At least make sure to call us once. Thank you. So as some tips here, just use the termination. Sorry, but I found out a bit of an annoying thing that my pods were dying off very slowly. I had to wait 30 seconds, and looking a bit, it is due to this built-in grace period seconds that it's set to 30. So you might want to lower that down so you can move faster with your deploys and updates and rollouts and whatnot. And if you really have problems with the networking, and you, in my case, where there wasn't a load balancer available, and even if I had exposed the service, I wouldn't have been able to access the server from outside, you can just use host network true. I will get through this in a moment, and you will learn more about it. This is a great way to fix the networking side. Also, regarding images, I would avoid deploying the latest tag. Right, this is a typical practice you see on a lot of websites. And my problem with this is that you never know what image is actually deployed on your pods, right? What if especially when you're doing the canary rollout thing where you want some image to other ones and another one to another, right? It would be really strange to have the latest on the first 3 pods and then the latest, but it is the latest on another 2 pods, right? It would make things hectic. Just use tags. And always pull your images. From what I've seen, this is for a beginner, it is perfect to do it like this. And I'm running out of time a bit, but I'll fit in the hour. Just a quick run through over what it means to deploy a VoIP media service in Kubernetes, such as RTP proxy, RTP engine, because you run into a different kind of problem when you try that. Specifically, you cannot expose a lot of ports on the Kubernetes service. If we look at the current documentation and how they would allow us to do so, we would have to enumerate each port that we need, right? So what if I have 30,000 ports? Am I going to build like a 30,000 line YAML or maybe 100,000? And that is exactly what this guy asked on the GitHub tracker 5 and a half ago in 2016. Doing above for 500 ports is not nice. Can you give us a better way? And you can see the feedback, right? Like hundreds of people are supporting this. Actually, they immediately responded positively. There are no reason against it. Some guy even started to work in this issue. Later on, he gave up. And then the years went by, and these guys from Telestack's RTC framework, they would need the feature as well for their application. Also, another comment with 10K ports for WebRTC and SIP frameworks. Another one for large ports for media processing engine and Docker. Yes, please, this guy is for game server proxy. And tens and tens of other people are still talking on that ticket. And we are here today, 5 years down the road. What's the conclusion? They seem to have discussed it. And the conclusion is that there is some problems with the IP tables. There is some problems with the node ports. I guess that is a Kubernetes abstraction. So I'm not sure how Kubernetes is a problem for Kubernetes. And at least they have a solution. Maybe we can do full IP forwarding. Super. I mean, we would more than happily accept that. And they made a KEP, which is a Kubernetes extension proposal, which is a work in progress. So the extension proposal is still ongoing. And maybe once that is finalized, they can start implementing the extension proposal. So yeah, you know, until then, so I'm not gonna, I'm not bad-mouthing Kubernetes at all. For me, it is just interesting to see the scale of the two user bases that are using it, right? Because if they cannot take the time to, or maybe they don't even have the time to invest in all of these hundreds of people, this has to be for a reason, right? And because they are doing releases every 4 months, they could do this port range thingy. But if you think about it, this is like grains of sand, these 200 people compared to maybe the hundreds of thousands which are doing HTTP in Kubernetes. So I guess it's rather a matter of priority. And until they fix this, you just use the host network true option, and that will fix all of your media servers. And here is a picture for what this actually does. It makes it so the container has the same network as the Kubernetes worker. So all of a sudden, you get all of the IPs that are available there. Maybe you can do some netting, and all of a sudden you have them available from the outside. So yeah, for us at least, that solves the problem. You know, of course, it introduces a limitation in that. I'm not sure if I have a slide for that. Okay, in that there is a one-to-one mapping now between worker and the pod, right? So if you want to host another RTP proxy, okay, I need to grow my Kubernetes cluster. But you know, you can maybe dimension them properly, and maybe even you could lead to a better quality of media if you host one of them on each node. So it could still be, it might not be just a hack. Okay, as far as debugging goes, the great thing about Kubernetes is that when something goes wrong, nobody knows. This guy wrote this in his blog. I totally agree with him. But it's really weird when you apply changes to your deployment, you don't get a feel for what happened. It's right, but still there are some ways you can tail the logs of a pod. You can maybe extract some events with this describe command, or a bit of information on your deployment or stateful set, or even log in to a specific pod. So It's not that bad, but definitely not friendly for newcomers. And as far as learning Kubernetes, I have my biggest tip for you. Remember that to each of these concepts, right? Container, pod, replica set, deployment, stateful set, blah, blah, blah. There are two sides of the story. There is the concept, and this is the documentation on their website. You click the concepts and you learn about them. And then there is the API. A bit further down, if you go here on reference, and the same structure, right? Where you can learn about each of them. So you have this dichotomy, right? For theory and practice. By the way, the API will fully describe the YAML structure, and you will not miss a single option in there. And then, frankly, it's pretty well documented. They, as big as the project is, right? The 4 million lines of code, the documentation surely matches it. So it's pretty nice. You can learn a lot from it. So as conclusions, keep in mind that some of the Kubernetes resources will not work with SIP and VoIP. You have to, find some workarounds, maybe, especially given the fact that the majority of Kubernetes users are not doing this, right? They're just doing HTTP. And the more state you put into your OpenSIPS service, or rather you already have, the more difficult it will be to migrate it to Kubernetes, although, of course, anything is possible. So you can find the workarounds. And as my advice, for now, until they stabilize the ports, the exposing mechanism, just use host network true and maybe downsize your worker nodes, right? The hardware on them. Just don't throw like a lot of CPUs and RAM, because it will not get used, right? As it will only be able to host one RTP proxy. So just scale them horizontally for now, until they will give us the option to also scale it vertically. So this was the kind of everything I had for today. Can OpenSIPS work in Kubernetes? For sure. Rather, will we have a good experience integrating it? Well, it's debatable, as there are still quite a few obstacles along the way. So thank you for your attention, and sorry for getting a bit out of the time schedule.
You're good. You're good.
The content is the most important. Sorry.
Exactly. Do you think we got time for one question?
Sure.
I guess so.
I think so. Moderators, do we have a question?
I have a question.
Of course.
It's yeah, because I like this kind of things. You told that it's possible to maintain dialog states by dumping it in Postgres. Oh, is part of the dialog module to dumping the dialog state in Postgres.
Absolutely. It will. This is a cool OpenSIPS know-how, or not sure how to say it. If OpenSIPS crashes, it will not just die away. It will say, right, even if it has the sword plugged into its heart, it will, okay, let me dump the dialogues, and then it dies. So,
oh wow!
so
very cool. That's very cool.
Of this.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool feature. So even if it crashes, when it restarts, everything will be in the database. Yeah.
The Phoenix.
Yeah.
Any more? Can we get one more? That was a quick question. I see that the conference chat, or the summit chat, is.
Does it still feel like trying to fit a round peg into square hole or something? Other way around. I got the impression of that.
Liviu? Sorry, I didn't get it.
Sorry, it's a little bit funny question, but do you still feel like you're trying to fit square peg into round hole?
Round hole. Yeah. the more definitely I felt that way when we thought about making it when making the hot backup. That's how I felt it. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's give Liviu a round of applause, everyone. That was awesome. Thanks for introducing us to Kubernetes and OpenSIPS.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, so to get moving to the next one, do we have Norm ready to go? I just want to say that the fundraiser for the OpenSIPS audit, which is the talk just after Norm's, describing what we're doing. I understand that some of you might need a little bit more information before you open up the pocketbook. So I want you to stick around and make sure that that you get a chance to listen to Sandro and see, you know, the benefits of what we're going to be getting with this. With that, I'm going to introduce Norman Brandiger. He's going to talk to us about how OpenSIPS solved a tricky SIPREC problem for him. Norm, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
There you go. Can you see my screen?
We can see your screen.
Great. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be back speaking in front of the community. OpenSIPS is a great project. And today I'm going to talk about SIPREC and OpenSIPS and some of the problems that I've had to solve. Didn't solve them by myself, but solved them in conjunction with the OpenSIPS team, the commercial side of the house. The result of this was the addition of a new module that I'll be describing today, and it's announced today, I guess. It'll be in the master branch as soon as, I guess, a little housekeeping is taken care of with it. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about what SIPREC is. Then I'm going to kind of dive in a little bit deeper. It's not going to get super technical, but going to talk a little bit about SIPREC. Then I'm going to describe the specific problem that I had and the solution, how we resolved the problem with some other open source projects, as well as the solution that resulted in the new module that is a great addition to OpenSIPS. And finally, I'm going to wrap it up by providing some of the information about SIPREC. What is SIPREC? SIPREC is the session recording protocol. It allows a proxy or an SBC to fork the audio between a caller and a callee, and basically forking it, making a copy of it, so that you can either eavesdrop on that call to listen to the audio, or you can actually store that audio and record it. Eavesdropping is the listening piece. Wiretapping is traditionally used when you're saying that you are going to record a call. That's what SIPREC is. I'm sure you've all heard the the message, this call may be monitored or recorded. Basically, that's an affirmative, yes, your call is being monitored. Traditionally, in the old PSTN world, there would be some sort of a hardware wiretap device. In today's world, the SIP protocol has been enhanced to allow forking of this media. Why would you want to do that? You would want to get a copy of the media for quality monitoring of call centers, agent training. Financial institutions have some legal, regulatory, and compliance reasons why they have to record calls. There may be some business analytic use cases where you want to get metrics on the calls. So there are legitimate reasons for recording the call that you're making. The other side is that in the United States, every state has regulations around call recording, either one-party consent, all-party consents, or some variations. In the EU, call recording is discussed under GDPR and the Financial Instruments Directive. And the best I could find is that every single country in the world has some sort of a regulation regarding recording calls or tapping into a call between the caller and the callee. It's important that you understand, if you're going to do this, it's important that you understand the law and follow your local regulations or national regulations. That's my PSA, that's my public service announcement. Let's talk a little bit about SIPREC now. SIPREC is an open SIP-based protocol for call recording. Primarily, excuse me, primarily there are two components. There's a session recording client and a session recording server. Now, usually if you think about forking a call from the SBC or from a proxy, you think of that which is full featured and it's got lots of capabilities. You usually think of that as a server, at least I do. And I think of this small single function device sitting out there that's my call recorder being kind of like a client. Well, in reality, it's not the case. In reality, it doesn't matter that the SBC can do a ton of things. It's still called a client because it's initiating the request to a server, and the recording server is called a server. So probably the first thing that's a little weird with SIPREC is that the client and server isn't necessarily what you expect. The components, this is actually sort of taken from the OpenSIPS website because OpenSIPS does have code to perform client functions, the session recording client. You can see that Alice and Bob are having their normal session with the standard SIP trapezoid. In the middle is this SRS, the session recording server, that gets forked media and SIP plus metadata, so that the SRS can figure out what call he's recording. And so this is kind of how it looks at a high level, a little complicated. I've kind of, in these following slides, I've simplified the diagram so that the session recording client is really like an SBC, which handles both SIP and RTP in one box. And it's really not broken out, as you see if I back up, to the media relay and the actual OpenSIP server. I've kind of consolidated them and, to make the diagrams a little simpler. Again, you can see that Alice and Bob are talking to each other, your standard, signaling going back and forth. With SIPREC, if the SBC is going to record some sessions, some of the media sessions, it will send an invite out to the recording server. That invite, you'll see, has two media lines in this particular example. It's got the media line for the RTP from Alice to Bob, and it's got a second one, which is from Bob to Alice. The forked media, as you can see in blue, goes off to the media recorder, which can also be part of the SRS, this session recording server as well. Now, you may say, hey Norm, you've got media that's Alice to the SBC, and you've got media from the SBC to Alice, and then there's a whole different session, there's media from the SBC over to Bob, and then another media stream from Bob to the SBC. Why doesn't your invite have four labels with, Alice to the SBC to Alice? Well, that's certainly possible, and that's basically a function of your session recording client. I kind of made this a simple example, but the reality is that the SRC is going to determine how many media streams it's going to send and what those media streams are. But basically, for illustrating this, Alice talking to Bob and Bob talking to Alice is good enough for our uses. So this is great. What's our problem then? The problem is that we wanted to connect to FreeSwitch. There are lots of use cases. There are lots of reasons why you may want to connect to FreeSwitch or you might not want to. But in our case, we wanted to connect to FreeSwitch. Same Alice talking to Bob. We've got the same two media streams in the SDP. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that it is not possible to handle multiple media streams with one call with FreeSwitch. Wow, I was pretty surprised when it didn't work and when I had to start digging in and finding out what the heck's going on. Why is FreeSwitch rejecting the calls, or why are things not working as I expect? Well, it turns out I'm not the only one that's had this problem. Sangoma had this problem a number of years ago. What they did was they ended up modifying Mod Sophia, which is the SIP stack inside FreeSwitch. Their statement was that the modifications, and I'm quoting exactly what they said, is the modifications are decently complex and non-trivial. So it's like, okay, Norm, are we gonna go in and start hacking up Mod Sophia to support SIPREC in FreeSwitch? And I'm like, I have a day job, I have other things to do. I don't want to spend my life just adding this support if there's a better way or a way around it. Well, turns out that there is. There's a product out there called, excuse me, another open source product out there called Draccio. Big shout out to Dave Orton. I think his name was brought up earlier in one of the sessions today. But Dave developed Draccio, and he developed a SIPREC application server. His project, which is written in Node.js, works, and it's a really novel solution to this problem. And in fact, we've proof of concepted it, and it does everything that you would want. It's a little complex, as you can see. I've put the steps down below to show what they do. But basically, Draccio's code breaks apart the two media lines that I showed earlier. Basically sends one media stream to FreeSwitch, hangs onto the other one. FreeSwitch then has to create a new call and bridge this incoming call to a new outgoing call to Draccio. Draccio has to get this second call from FreeSwitch, link the two media streams together in the 200 OK that it sends back to the to the SPC or the session recording client. It works. It's pretty interesting. It's a novel solution, and there's no fault with the technical way of solving it. There were some other issues that we had that were not related to this necessarily, this flow, but I did want to at least say that yes, there is a solution that solves this problem out there. It's not, as I said, it's a solution we use for proof of concept, but going into production, we wanted something that was more production ready. Now we're introducing the B2B SDP demux module, a brand new module, OpenSIPS module written by Razin. It parses the multiple M lines from the SDP, and it will then create new invites where each invite has a single media stream. So these two invites get sent to FreeSwitch. Life is good. FreeSwitch responds 200 OK to each of those invites. The module then organizes those two 200 OKs into the single response that the session recording client is expecting. This solution works nicely. It kind of more accurately reflects two one-way media streams going to FreeSwitch They're both, inbound calls to FreeSwitch. FreeSwitch doesn't have to do the dance where it gets one call inbound, has to make another outbound call, and you've got Dragio linking the two media streams together. This is a much more elegant solution, and it works nicely. Brand new module announced here during the summit. How does it work? Again, there's the same picture. This time, the session recordings server is OpenSIPS with the B2B STP demux module. Demux is, as I'm sure most everyone knows, is demultiplexing. We're demultiplexing the two media lines into single media lines. As you can see on the bottom right, we got one invite, Alice to Bob's media. The other invite is Bob to Alice's media to FreeSwitch. Works like a champ. The code is pretty simple, but I did want to put it here. I'm not one for throwing a lot of code in talks, but you obviously have to load the module. In your route command, I did put this code here because it's parsing SIPREC can be a little interesting. SIPREC media is in XML format. So this is the code to get the associate time out of the SIPREC media. There's lots of data. If you're going to do this, you're going to kind of dig in, but this is an example to get you started, how you can parse the XML metadata from the SIPREC invite that comes into to OpenSIPS. The interesting headers, we have Alice's leg and we have Bob's leg, and the B2B SDP demux call. The reason I put local route in is that you can't use your typical relay or forward functions within OpenSIPS, because these two new invites, or these however many invites you've got, they are not, they're brand new invites. They're not an invite that you're actually forwarding. So the invite from the SBC, or the session recording client, is basically almost like a back-to-back, thus the B2B prefix in the module. It's a back-to-back kind of a setup. So they're brand new invites that are coming out of OpenSIPS, which is why local route has to be called. If you want to do something with them. In this example, I'm using the dispatcher module to figure out where do we want to send these invites, which free switch or free switches. So kind of a little quirk, not quirk, but a little piece of this module as you start using it. So excuse me. So that's what we've done. That's how it works. We've got a number of there are a number of RFCs that describe SIPREC in all its gory details. It's much more complex than I presented, but I did want to show how we solved this with a new module from OpenSIPS that is going to be publicly available after the summit. The takeaway is that this new module, the back-to-back SDP demux module, solves the SDP demuxing problem introduced by SIPREC. I'd like to thank you, and if there are any questions, we have Rosman, who's the author of the module, online, so he can answer questions you might have about the module, or if you have anything else. So, thank you.
Excellent. I think we have plenty of time here for at least one or two questions. Actually, I have a great question for Norm. I know that you really focused on making it as simple as possible, but can you give us a quick little insight on how you guys are dealing with, let's say, attended transfers, blind transfers in integrating it with all of this here?
Well, the one piece that I kind of glossed over is that SIPREC is one-way media. There is no traffic that goes from the session recording server back to the client in terms of managing or maintaining the call state. So all of that call state between Alice and Bob is untouched. So if there's a call transfer, if Alice transfers to Sally, that standard sits between Alice, Sandy, the SBC, and Bob. It's the SBC's management of that that determines what traffic, what media is sent down to the session recording server. So all the call transfer and conferencing and things like that, all putting a call on hold, all of that is standard SIP, and the session recording client, the SBC, determines what media gets sent down.
Gotcha. Okay. Anybody else have some questions?
I saw a question on the summit chat. Let me, from Artyom. Can this pattern of usage replace SIP monitoring like Homer and recording by RTP proxy like RTP engine? So let me paste this here.
Well, they're solving a couple of different problems. Homer is a full-featured monitoring and analysis tool, kind of like, Wireshark or something like that on steroids. So Homer is solving one kind of a problem. This solution is solving a different problem where you're really focused on just this media stream for your business cases, such as I said, recording calls for financial or regulatory compliance, for call centers, where you might want to recall calls to then play back to an agent to help an agent get better at how he speaks. There may be there's different use cases that you would want to use a session recording server versus the use case of Homer, which is for argument's sake, a Wireshark on steroids.
Max, I think you have a question.
Oh yeah, thanks. Thanks, Norma. Interesting presentation. A little bit tricky question. What is the point then of using SIPREC, if I may? Because the whole point of SIPREC, in my view, is to kind of have a SIP call with both streams. And if you're breaking it into two separate streams, you can basically just fork two invites, I guess, for inbound and outbound. You don't need to combine them to SIPREC.
Well, SIPREC is the protocol. I can't answer the question as to why this protocol was defined. It has a number of business cases. There may be different ways, as you're 100% right, Max, and there are other ways to solve the problem of forking the media. A standard way is using SIPREC. There are third-party products that use the SIPREC protocol to record audio. There are definitely multiple ways of solving this problem.
Oh, yeah.
I think I can answer this question. So initially, SIPREC is meant for to be used by two different organizations. So one organization is doing is handling the calls, and you are forwarding something to a different organization. Let's say like I don't know, something that tries to regulate everything.
Like the FCC.
Yeah, I didn't want to say that. So it has to be like a standard way of communicating between them. Now, the SIPREC standards provides this kind of flexibility. Like in SIPREC, you can group like 5 or 4, even 4 calls or whatever, an arbitrary number of calls, combine them in a single invite and send it the recording server. So this is standard. So as long as this is standard, there are a few solutions that are doing it. However, FreeSwitch doesn't. So that's why we need this kind of multiplexing.
Yeah, okay, I see. Okay, well, it's quite surprising actually that there is no at least easy way to do it in FreeSwitch, because I would imagine it can manage multiple streams, which is required for RTC support or stuff.
I think the issue is not like multiple streams, but multiple audio streams in the same time.
But I mean,
Yeah,
it's all RTP, right? So at least I don't know internals of FreeSwitch, so I would imagine if it can manage 2 RTP streams, 1 video, 1 audio, at least theoretically it should have all the wheels and cogs to handle the audio.
It does, and the code is in the Mod Sophia code, and it's evidently this is a limitation of Mod Sophia. The Sangoma folks found it and solved it themselves by modifying Mod Sophia, but that's a commercial product. Their SBC is a commercial product, so it's not. The solution's not open source.
Anyway, yeah, I see. Oh yeah, Sans was one.
Yeah, in FreeSwitch, the abstraction of a call is one call, and you cannot choose on which stream you want to use.
Yeah, probably that's because FreeSwitch handles different layers of signaling, not only SIP, which probably don't support
it use but I think that probably there was no use case when it was projected in the beginning, the specification of the abstraction.
Hence the need for 2 invites to FreeSwitch for each side.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we can address like one question and one answer on different topics. Sounds strange, but that's the case. First, I think it's a good question coming from the summit chat from Vinicius. He's asking, what about re-invites to mute and unmute medias? So maybe after that we can follow. There are more questions on the chat. So that's the question. And then if Sandro doesn't upset too much, we can give Lorenzo maybe like 2 minutes to explain about the Homer vision on recording. So why he thinks that actually recording it's not actually wrong when it comes to Homer. So let's find the answer first for the re-invite question. So maybe
I'm curious about Lorenzo's answer as well. So
yeah,
please.
So I can answer the re-invite question very very quickly. The SIPREC protocol does allow for re-invites to be sent up to the session recording client, the SBC, to say turn off the media. And so yes, you can have media sessions turned off or re-invited to turn back on. Now, the support for that is in the SBC or the SRC. Some work better than others. I've found that in some cases, re-inviting to turn off media turns off all of the media streams, not just the media stream that you're interested in. So it does work. You can send a re-invite back upstream, but the support for it is primarily going to be on the SRC.
Yeah. So shortly, it's handled by this module, like when mixing or demixing. Sorry, the SDP keeps tracks of each each media stream. So when you have it's able to separately mute, unmute the streams. So for stop recording and pause and resume recording per stream. So it's translating the mute, unmute from let's say via FreeSwitch into pausing, resuming each separate audio stream from from the SIPREC side. And yeah, as said, let's give Lorenzo 2-3 minutes to pitch for the Homer and recording.
Well, it's not really going to be a pitch, but maybe more of a clarification. First of all, technology-wise, QXIP, which is our company, has this feature, and we do provide it. So RTP recording and all of this stuff exists. We even have a product that does it for lawful interception. So we know the subject well. But this is one of those cases, and I'm saying this as a total open source freak, where we did not think it was going to be a good idea to feature this in the open source stack that we have, simply because we don't want to build weapons. And this, in our view, would be weaponized way too easily, since we're in the passive realm. So, in the active realm, if an operator that owns the traffic decides to do whatever with that traffic and their contracts allow it, great. But our tools are designed to be passive, so they can be very, very easily weaponized. On the other side, we believe in science and metrics. So our experience from the last 10 years is that numbers speak much louder than RTP recordings and invading users' privacy for anything that's not mandated by the law. So unless it's the police, we don't think anybody should be able to record anything that we're saying to each other, to our moms, or in this conference. That's more or less our stance on this, and why we purposely not include this type of feature in the stack. It's not a technology limitation, more of a philosophical decision.
Okay, thank you, Lorenzo, for the completion here, for the update.
So actually, Lorenzo, what you're saying is that the best way to do it is to take a lot of statistics, metrics, MOS, etc., and basing on that judge the quality.
A good model can, reasonably assess the quality of a stream just by looking at the headers. There is no use case for accessing the payload of an RTP packet with the excuse of measuring its quality nowadays, and especially with encrypted traffic. So it's more about how a stream that we know exists should behave. If I know this is the protocol, this is the clock rate, and whatever. If I know all the session parameters of this exchange, I can observe it. I can understand if it falls within those parameters or outside of those parameters without sniffing anybody's conversations.
Right.
Let's
take this.
Let's this space as well.
I apologize, gentlemen. This obviously is a very interesting debate, but we do have our last speaker of the day, and that's Sandro. And it is a really important topic. He's going to be discussing with us what's actually going to happen in the ins and outs of the security audit that we've been fundraising for these last few weeks. Sandro, are you here?
I am, yes.
Excellent, excellent. Well, and sir, please take it away.
Thank you. So my presentation is called the OpenSIPS Security Audit, and I'll be discussing how it came about and what the plan is, give you a bit of insight. So let's start with an introduction. So why do a security audit in the first place? Or you could also ask it differently, why do offensive security? Why take such an approach? And by offensive security, I mean taking the approach taken by adversaries or attackers, so simulating real attacks. And the reason I think is rather simple. It's that you can only find security flaws if you look for them, and then you can address those security flaws. In some cases, we see solutions which just try to fix security issues without actually doing any security testing, which is not the best approach in my opinion. So that's the approach. And in the case of OpenSIPS, of course, OpenSIPS is an application that is put in very sensitive areas, so it needs to be trusted. It has a trusted security function in many cases. So that's why security audit or penetration testing. But who am I to talk about this? Hi, I'm Sandro Gauci. I'm the original author of SIPVicious OSS, the open source SIPVicious, and it's a security testing tool set for SIP, also known as Friendly Scanner, if you watch your log files. In InfoSec or cybersecurity, I've been around since over 20 years now. It didn't used to be called cybersecurity. It used to be called InfoSec. And in the past 13 years, I've been doing offensive security, leading my company Enable Security. What we do is we do voice over IP and WebRTC security things, so offensive security things. So pen testing, security audits, developing security tools such as SIPVicious, and consultancy and training related to offensive security in real-time communications. Now, let's start with a story. And like most stories nowadays, this one starts with a social network. It's LinkedIn, actually. So Bogdan messaged me on LinkedIn way back in January this year. And he asked me basically, if we're interested in doing some pen testing against OpenSIPS. I'm like, yeah, definitely. It's the sort of thing that we look forward to. So we had a chat, had a video call, and started discussing what he has in mind and what the people at OpenSIPS have in mind. And well, a few months passed by because we were discussing a lot on email to discuss what the scope is. I'll go into that soon. But eventually, in April, we had a proposal based on our discussions. And then we had more negotiations, 2 more months, no pictures there. I didn't take any pictures. But eventually, we had a signature. So, woohoo. And then what about the money? So we had already discussed this, of course. This was going to be a community-funded project. And so the OpenSIPS community or people, they started crowdfunding, or partially on GoFundMe. So I took a screenshot of that. And of course, this was in June. Me and my colleague, we were all the time checking this website to see, is it going to happen or not? This is an interesting and exciting thing. This is our first time that we're doing a pen test that is kind of crowdfunded and more public. Usually they are behind non-disclosure agreements. So at the end of July, it looked like something is going to happen because the first milestone, and I will describe milestones soon as well, was reached in end of July. So that was pretty cool. And so, yeah, we're at that stage. I think now there were some more contributions, so thanks for that. But let me describe how we got the proposal together. Essentially, the first months, in fact, were all about this, defining the scope, which in the case of OpenSIPS is a large project, right? So, you can't just test OpenSIPS, all of it. You have to choose those areas that you really want to test and start with those. And so we had a lot of discussion, and in the end, we had defined these different areas, modules, and code that was most interesting. And based on that scope, then we could create a test plan, sort of. So we know that a particular module would really benefit from a particular set of tests, so we write that down. And then we have a test plan that actually, it gives us a pretty good idea of the amount of effort that we need to put into such a project. And that test plan covers the scope. And therefore, we can come up with a price. We can know how much to charge. Now, this is, of course, not an exact test plan because our work involves a lot of creativity. Some tests we find out later that are less effective than others, while we might discover that some other test might make more sense for a particular feature that's being tested. So it's not exact science, but it gives us a pretty good idea of the effort that we need to do. And of course, it gives us an idea of a plan, right, which is important in such projects. And based on that, then we have the scope of work, which I just described. And then we can arrive to the pricing and the schedule. And so how did we define the actual work? Well, of course, there were a lot of discussions, but we ended up with 2 milestones. The first milestone was 15,000 euro, which has been reached. This is the prices are a very special price for the OpenSIPS community, so this is not reflecting our normal rates. I should say that. And the second milestone costs an additional 5,000 euro. Now, the first milestone, in terms of scope, had the following, right? It had the OpenSIPS parser, SIP parsing, and other parts of the parser as well, like digest and so on. And these 3 modules, the auth module, the TM module, and the dialog module, all of which are very commonly used, right? So these are the basis of many, many configurations out there. And in terms of tests for this particular scope, it would be black box fuzzing, instrumented fuzzing, logical tests targeting especially authentication, and flooding in terms of concurrent connection tests, especially that. Now, the second milestone we will focus on, if it's reached, and hopefully after this presentation it is, we will focus on the protocol modules, so UDP, TCP, TLS, and WebSocket. Those last 2 are the most interesting for me. The OpenSIPS management interface, internal IDs, and topology hiding. And for that scope, we plan to do the following tests. So tests related to TLS, not just the basic TLS testing, of course, using automated tools, but looking at how certificates are handled and so on and so forth. There's a lot to do in terms of TLS. Black box fuzzing, especially with the WebSocket handling. Okay, the WebSocket protocol is an interesting one. Analysis of TCP and UDP handling, fuzzing of the management interface commands, topology hiding fuzzing, which could be interesting, and you can do logic sort of tests with fuzzing together. Can be interesting there. We've done that before, very successful there before, not with OpenSIPS. Fuzzing of internal IDs exposed by TM and dialog modules. So, of course, it wouldn't be a presentation of ours if we didn't have a demo, but we didn't yet start. So, yeah, we can't show you anything with OpenSIPS, but what we can do is we can give an example. And an excellent tool is SNGrep, because it's an excellent tool for debugging SIP. We use it ourselves from time to time. And also, it had some buffer overflows. So it's an excellent tool also for using it as an example for our case. This was fixed. We had found this during an event called OpenSIPit, which I recommend. We found it by mistake. And yeah, we're going to use it as an example to show what black box fuzzing consists of in a very simple way. So I have a demo here. Let's share this demo. So we have 3 different applications here. We have SNGrep on the top, our fuzzer on the bottom, SIPREC fuzzer, and on the right we have our echo server, which is displaying what it's receiving. And we started the fuzzer. It's very slow, one packet per second or something like that, just to show what the echo server is receiving. And you can see on the echo server these malformed SIP packets, right? Now this is not going to reproduce any crash in this case because it's way too slow and it doesn't hit the packet that produces this issue. But if you run the fuzzer at normal speed, it immediately hits the code that is vulnerable, and SNGrep, as you can see, core dumped, so it crashed. Now, this was found using black box fuzzing, but OpenSIPS is kind of much more mature, right? It has years and years of experience. It's used in all sorts of ways, and it's not SNGrep. It's not a tool that you run to debug SIP messages. So we don't expect to find anything using this simple approach in the case of OpenSIPS. However, this approach can be used, can be very effective when used with other methods. So it's just one part of the equation. But if we compile OpenSIPS with sanitizers, you can find certain bugs that you wouldn't otherwise find while doing black box fuzzing. Coverage reporting is very helpful. We can set up all sorts of different configurations in OpenSIPS. The fuzzer can be configured to fuzz specific areas, especially specific headers. And of course, using semi-manual techniques, we can do fuzzing for things that would not trigger crashes, but would still lead to security problems, discovery of certain security problems, like the authentication bypass stuff, right? Now that's one technique. There's another technique that we will be using called instrumented fuzzing. And essentially, in this case, you don't have an external fuzzer, but the target application itself sort of is the fuzzer itself. It's fuzzing itself in memory. It's very efficient as a method. And in its most simple way, you would use this to fuzz particular functions that you think might be interesting security-wise, especially parsers, okay? You can also use instrumented fuzzing to fuzz an entire server, achieving similar results as the black box fuzzing, but probably better ones. And we do plan on doing that. It's a bit more complicated, so I won't go into that. So I don't have so much time. But let's take a look at a very simple example of how it looks when you use libfuzzer.
Sandro, just take your time. No worries.
All right, thank you. So essentially, you have this functional LLVM fuzzer test1 input, which is called by libfuzzer, and then your code would be in here, and your code would be to fuzz a particular message, particular function, sorry, and this function is being fed malformed data all the time until perhaps something happens, right? Some memory issue is found. So how does this add value to the SIPS projects, to the OpenSIPS project, this whole thing? Because there's a bit of a problem with pen testing and security testing in general. Most security testing happens, or pen testing happens at one point in time. And an active project like OpenSIPS is changing all the time, right? So if you do a test right now, that's kind of testing only this point in time. And then until the next test, you might introduce all sorts of new security issues, new security bugs. So we're always thinking, how can our work be used in the future? And the most obvious way is of course to take our findings. Let's say we find 10 security bugs. The ways to reproduce them can be fed to regression testing, so that you make sure that it's not reintroduced. The bugs that were fixed are not reintroduced at a later stage. So that's one way, and many projects do this, even in the commercial world. But another thing that we are thinking about is that our material that we use for fuzzing can be integrated as part of the automated quality assurance processes within OpenSIPS. And I can't talk about this without mentioning OSS Fuzz, which is something that uses the Google Cloud, but it's open source, and it's available to open source projects. And I'm gonna show a very quick example for Apache HTTPD. So if you go on GitHub, first of all, you can see there's many different projects that are part of OSS Fuzz already. And we can look at, what build.sh does. Basically, it's building certain files using libfuzzer. And then let's look at the fuzz_parse.c, which essentially is using the same function that we showed before, setting up memory and so on, and pools, and then calling expr parse, which I would assume is a parsing function that is quite important for Apache HTTPD. So you would have something similar in the case of OpenSIPS. Now, so our work can help the OpenSIPS community to get into this, make it easier at least. Of course, our focus is the security audit. So this is a positive side effect, but it's not our main focus, right? But what we will give will be a very good starting point, I think. It can help the OpenSIPS community to automate their security testing efforts. And of course, this doesn't make a future security test or security audit less needed, because you do need creativity to find new ways, just like attackers, right? To find new ways that your product or your application can break, can have security problems. But this goes hand in hand together with automated testing. And so in making the code base more robust, essentially. So what's the plan? Well, we do plan to start very soon, next week, in fact. We should be done around the end of October. In the end of it, of course, we will give our reports to the core developers and any other material. But during the testing, we'd like to have this as a collaborative exercise. So during the testing, we hope to have communication with the main developers, so that any critical fixes can be done very quickly if we find anything which is critical. And secondly, of course, we might need help ourselves. So yeah, it's good to have. We find that that's the best way to make a successful project. Now, on fundraising, so the first milestone has been reached, and thanks for everyone who contributed. But if anyone wants to still contribute, there is still space for that, as my friends have been mentioning. So yeah, we'd love to cover the second milestone as well. So please do contribute if your organization benefits from something like this, right? So yeah, my conclusion is basically thanks to Bogdan and the OpenSIPS people for this opportunity, both speaking at this summit and also for this work. We look forward to starting and we look forward to working on this. Thanks to the sponsors and to my colleague Alfred for his work and demos. He worked on this presentation as well. And also, of course, we'll be doing the work for testing OpenSIPS together. So if you want to get in touch, we have a blog about real-time communication security called Communication Breakdown on rtcsec.com. There's my email. Our website is, of course, enablesecurity.com. And the opensips.org security audit page is there for reference. It's not our website, but it's where you can check this out. So thank you.
Thank you, Sandro.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandro. Thank you.
Pleasure. My pleasure.
I need to comment a bit on something you mentioned, because probably for the rest of the people and for the community, it's the first time they hear about the so-called, what you mentioned as stage 1 and stage 2. Just not to complicate things too much and not to, how to say, lose the wings on the way. We decided not to, let's say, publicly advertise in the very beginning the idea that the whole testing it, at least in terms of agreement with you, it's split in 2 steps. Basically, the first step, which are the most, let's say, important or critical parts of OpenSIPS, and then a second, of course, a smaller stage, which addresses some specific, let's say, potential risky things from the dialogue module, from the TM module. So let's say something more elevated. To be sure that at the end of the day we managed to to get the project ongoing, we decided to split this in 2 stages. Right now, the first stage, it's covered in terms of donations, and the second stage is like I would say maybe 50% going. So with a bit of a help, like the last big push, I think we can cover both, and actually to at the end to get a great audit for all the relevant part. So I just mentioned that just to understand what Sandro was mentioning as the first stage and the second stage. Again, it's just something that we agreed between our OpenSIPS project and Sandro. We really wanted to be sure that we get enough funds for the raising, so we didn't want to put everything from the day 1. So we said let's do stages and see exactly how the fundraising goes with this. So just a couple of let's say hints of what went behind the curtains with this.
Good. Glad we got that covered. So if you aren't convinced at this point that this is a noble cause, I don't know what we can do to let loose that change in the pocket, folks. We will still pester you for the rest of the week. Like Bogdan said, we're halfway to the second milestone at this point. And I think by tomorrow we'll have everything updated on the OpenSIPS page, as well as the GoFundMe, to reflect exactly where we're at. I want to actually thank Sandro. This was really awesome. Let's give this guy a round of applause.
Yeah.
However, things got a little crazy there at the end of the last presentation, and we never really got a chance to thank and applaud Norm Brandiger for his awesome presentation at SIPREC. So let's give him a round of applause too, a little belated. Well, folks, that's the end of our speakers for today. We'll be here again tomorrow at the same time. I know that all of you are anxiously waiting to see the updates to the Picker 4.x. Interesting story here. Liviu actually reached out to the developers of the Picker on Slack and troubled them with our complaints. And apparently, there's been some updates. So we hope that today's picking experience goes a little bit smoother than it normally does. So without further ado, what are the prizes for today, Bogdan? Pull back.
Yeah, I was about to refresh. We have the same like yesterday. Shortly, a beautiful, fresh, not wear at all T-shirt with the OpenSIPS Summit 2021.
Wow.
And of course, I have to mention it's a collectible item, please. I plan to start digging into the closet and try to find, I think maybe first T-shirts were like 2016 or something like that.
Just to, you know, getting those anymore.
Yeah, it will be a good exercise to see if I will be able to find them all. But going back, so we have this beautiful T-shirt for today, and one more hour of design clinics with us, with the OpenSIPS team. So if you want to prove your design, if you want to, let's say, get a quick look over your platform and so on and so on, that's the right way to get it done. So, Liviu, do we have everything ready to be fired?
All right, we should have. Let me start the pick. And I was able to successfully configure it to only pick the online users this time. After, of course, as Alex mentioned, running into a couple of bugs with the application because we just have too many users on the Raffle channel. So it crashed. It kept crashing because, yeah, there were over 200 users. Okay, so whenever already here.
Let's start the drum roll.
All right. And
go!
Robert Tippenhauer. Huh?
Robert!
Congratulations!
Are you online?
Are you online, Robert?
He's online. Let's see if he's here, actually.
Yeah,
Robert.
Is he shadow online?
He
Once
let
again,
the
folks.
Slack, his Slack window open, and he went fishing, probably. No, he's typing. Come on, stop.
Okay.
He's typing.
Whoa, that was very close.
That's
No
a
wire.
first hit. Woohoo!
Yeah.
Yeah, you caught a great fish.
Robert, you're very lucky. Just so you know, the timing is up to my discretion. We were about to pick, but you made it, buddy. So, for those of you that have been dying to get some FaceTime, virtually, of course. Didn't mention that, did you, Bogdan? There are this is a no expenses paid trip to your web browser with the OpenSIPS team to discuss for 1 hour everything you needed to know to figure out that you're not crazy.
We've all been there.
Exactly. Let's start the drum roll.
Stojkovic. Vladan Stojkovic.
Yeah,
Vladan,
congratulations.
he's here.
Done.
Well done.
Yay!
Well
Nice.
done. Well, that went unusually fast.
Wow. Yeah, comparing with yesterday, that's a big improvement.
It's 4.1. It's no more bugs.
Well done, Liviu. Well done, Liviu.
This is a well-received update.
Yep.
So with that, folks, that's the end of our tour for today. We'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you so much to all of the speakers today, all of the moderators, of course, the OpenSIPS team for making this possible, and to our sponsor, Subspace, who was very generous and really loves the community. Make sure you check them out. We'll see you all here tomorrow, folks. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Great day. Thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.